Thanks to you all for staying on the roller coaster up until this afternoon. That's certainly how I'm feeling after all the really stimulating talks that we've heard so far. So here we go. I'm going to talk about managing natural capital for ecosystem service provision. So I'm touching on a topic where we have different management actions that we can take. You can't just lock away natural capital and expect it to continue to provide ecosystem services to you. We often have to take actions in order to improve the condition of natural capital and maintain or enhance ecosystem service provision. So I don't think I need this slide because we have had this already. We all know what natural capital is now. So I've been thinking about natural capital and the way that it's integrated with other kinds of capital to produce the ecosystem goods and services that we want to get. So we combine social capital, natural capital, built capital, and technological capital, and we've had some great examples of how innovations in technology can help to enhance the ecosystem services that we get from natural capital. So it's not just risks from these other kinds of economic activities, but we can also get opportunities and benefits from combining them, and I think that's important. But ultimately what we're talking about is benefits to humans, be that food, healthy, happy children, fresh water provision. That's what we're after. Those are the targets that we're trying to achieve. So this is some really nice work by a PhD student of mine who's actually just graduated, Fleur Masek. And we were interested in exploring how to manage natural capital assets. So we took some existing frameworks which map the flow of ecosystem services from our natural capital assets and said, well, okay, where does management fit in? Where do those things like managing invasive species or planting woodlands, restoring bogs, where do they fit into this natural capital framework? So they fit in at the stock end. We thought that it's important, we can't really manage ecosystem services directly. What we can do is we can change the quantity, the quality, and the configuration of our natural capital assets. Now these assets have some manageable attributes, so there are some things that we can change relatively easily, like chopping down woodland, planting woodland, improving the quality of existing stocks. And there are some things that we can't change particularly easily, like the clay content of our soil or its the tensile properties of roots and their ability to prevent erosion. Those are things that we don't have a lot of control over. And I think it's important that we make that distinction between manageable and unmanageable attributes, or harder to manage attributes. Nothing is impossible, I guess, if you throw enough money and technology and brain power at it, but in a pragmatic sense, there are some manageable and less manageable attributes of natural capital. So we can undertake some management actions, and that has some influence on our stocks of natural capital. Now, our job as ecologists, I'm an ecologist, and my job, what I love to do, is work out what happens when you go from the stocks, from the species, the woodland, the bogs that you have present in your landscape, through to the ecosystem services, and then ultimately to the benefits to humans. Now, these benefits are important because they shape our values. If we don't see a benefit, if we can't identify a swallow, to use Dieter's example, then we're not going to campaign for or put pressure on our governments or elect politicians or lobby government to preserve and enhance those stocks. So I think it's very important to try and bring those benefits to the fore. So that's a conceptual framework, and we've probably had about one too many conceptual frameworks today already, so I'm going to go to some concrete examples of managing natural capital assets. So this is some work, again, by a student of mine, Natalie Kerr, who's now at Tufts University in the US. And we were looking at how different management techniques can have different constraints and produce very different outcomes. And here we were looking at invasive plants in particular. So the photograph down on the screen there is our field site in New Zealand, where all of the dark green stuff that you can see on that mountain are actually invasive pine trees. So they have negative impacts on aesthetics, on cultural uses, on opportunity costs for farmers. Basically, they're an unwanted element of the landscape. So we're trying to work out how best to manage these pines. You can kill them using various exciting and exotic forms of management, like double chain plowing, which you basically attach a chain between two bulldozers or tractors and knock over a whole pile of trees. You can apply aerial foliar herbicides like glyphosate, and there's various other things you can do. They all have costs and benefits. Here, we were looking at the effects of these different management actions on the population growth rate of these pines, with the idea being that if you can reduce the population growth rate, ideally below that horizontal line threshold where they can replace themselves, then you're going to get some benefit. Now, I'm not going to talk about the moving from the lack of pines to benefit side of the equation. I can do a whole other talk about that, but let's just stick with this as a proxy for benefit for now. So you can see that the double chain plowing option reduces population growth rate a little bit. If we could maybe get more efficient at that, we could possibly get it right down underneath that threshold. That's what the dotted line is supposed to show there. And aerial foliar is much more effective. It gets it right down so that the population starts to decline. So we have more or less effective management options. And these have different costs. Double chain plowing is very cheap. Aerial foliar herbicide is quite expensive. So we can start to look at some of those costs. However, there's several dimensions of success for management actions. It's not just about cost, and it's not just about efficacy. And we looked at several of these dimensions. We looked at efficacy, which is how much of a reduction in population growth rate you can achieve with these management actions. We looked at cost, what's the cheapest. We looked at what managers prefer. So we did a big survey of managers of 14 different invasive plant species. I think we surveyed over 50 managers. And we did content analysis on their replies to try and work out why they were prioritizing management strategies in the way that they were. And then we looked at cost effectiveness. This was basically the reduction in population growth rate you got per dollar spent on the management action. And finally, elasticity is a shortcut measure that ecologists use to try and work out where in the life cycle we should intervene with a particular species in order to get the biggest impact on population growth rate. In an ideal world, our actions would align for all of these different management dimensions of management success. And in that case, we'd be looking at a management strategy which would fit on that inner pentagon. None of our management strategies do that. There's 3 different colors on that graph. The blue is herbicide, the red is grazing, the orange is mowing. And you can see that some are better on some dimensions than others. And I think this is very important to realize that there are multiple different measures of success in any system, and that sometimes they won't all align, in which case a decision needs to be made on which measure of success we want to actually use. And we did this for 14 different invasive plant species, and I'll refer you to the paper for more detail on that. A second approach we've been taking is, again, using a case study to try and motivate some development of new tools that we can use in this area. And this one is, again, Fleur Masek and my postdoc, Anna Cergo, who are working in we're working here with Romanian grasslands. We have grazed pastures, mowed hay meadows, and abandoned hay meadows. So these are 3 different management techniques. And here we didn't even look at costs of these actions. We were interested in how different kinds of management can have different impacts on species which we can put into provider groups. So some species are good pollen providers, other species produce good fodder for cows and sheep, other species have medicinal herbs and used locally, others are good for honey production, nitrogen fixation, and then we have some endangered plant species as well, which have some cultural conservation values. And we can look at the impacts of management on each of these different species provider groups. We're really excited by this approach. We think it's a way of using existing biodiversity data by grouping species into these provider groups and looking at the impacts of different kinds of management on the provider group as a whole. We can sort of get some shortcuts around predicting what the effects of different kinds of management might be on natural capital assets and assess those in terms of the different benefits that we might derive from them. So this just brings me back again to this natural capital management framework. And it's all about, for me as an ecologist, working out what impact our actions have on the natural capital stocks and how those impacts flow through to services and benefits to humans. And we've already seen this slide today as well, and thanks to the Natural Capital Coalition for this, that by working out what these benefits and costs are in multiple dimensions, we're going to assist decision makers in business, in the corporate world, and in governments with policymakers and society in trying to help them to make basically give them the information to make their decisions. This idea of capabilities that, again, Dieter was talking about previously. So I'm going to finish there, and just want to say thanks to the wonderful people I work with, including Fleur Masek, Anna Cergo, and Natalie Kerr. Thank you.